What if the way you tell a story could change everything? Not just in business, but in life. Most of us know the power of storytelling, but we often don't consider ourselves to be a storyteller or even where to begin. Today on the Leadership Project, we dive deep into the art and science of storytelling, not just as a skill, but as a transformational tool for leadership and influence. I'm joined by Andrea Sampson, CEO of Talk Boutique and a TED-trained speaking coach, who helps leaders and teams unlock their communication potential. We'll explore the power of everyday storytelling, why it matters, and how you can use it to drive impact, engagement, and change. Stay tuned to the end as Andrea shares with us a much simpler framework for help us to unlock the power of storytelling. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Andrea Sampson. Andrea is the CEO and founder of an organization called Talk Boutique, who help organizations with their communication skills to unlock the power of storytelling as a catalyst for growth and change. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Andrea is also a TED-trained coach trainer, or speaking trainer. So anyone that's looking to unlock the full power of public speaking is something that Andrea has a specific role to do. But today we're going to take more about everyday storytelling. That's going to be the focus. What does it mean to have storytelling in your business, and what is the power that can unlock as a catalyst for change and growth? So Andrea, without any further ado, I'd love it if you would say hello to the audience and give us a little flavor of your background, your personal background, and what inspired you to do the work that you do today.
Thanks so much, Mick. I am really honored to be here with you and your guests and to be able to tell you a little bit more about what it is that I do. Well, just to kind of give you that background of, how did I get here? And I get this question a lot because, I didn't come up through a traditional route. So my background, I spent most of my career in advertising, almost 25 years, working for some of the largest agency networks in the world and some of the world's most recognizable brands. I was a strategist and a planner, and it was something I loved to do. It was strategy work, and I was always thinking deeply about consumers and why they make the buying decisions that they make. But I got to a point in that career, when I went into that career young and, still a little bit wet behind the ears, I truly, truly believed that I could make impact and change. And, 25 years in, I started to really recognize that ultimately advertising, while important, is truly a selling medium. And it's difficult to create any real impact through that medium. And I started looking for something else to do. And I found myself, very fortunately, in the TED world. I was hired, as all TEDx's are volunteer driven. I was hired as a speaker's coach. And I didn't even know what a speaker's coach was, but I certainly found that the skills that I had in advertising was everything I needed to be a great speaker's coach. And specifically, this requirement of understanding the consumer, or, humans, really, human behavior. And what in the TED world we needed to do. And I started working with these incredibly intelligent, individuals, scientists, academics, technologists, people who were doing big work in the world, who, quite frankly, I'd never heard of, but wondered why I hadn't. But each one of them was coming to me with this big knowledge that they had and the requirement of doing a 6, 12, or 18-minute TED Talk. And as you can imagine, if you want to take your life's work and turn it into 6 minutes, that's challenging. And so I had this skill that I had learned in advertising about bringing things into what I call in our advertising days, the key consumer insight. But in the TED world, what that really was an idea. And I was able to frame ideas in a way that created a succinctness that allowed for the story to hold that idea. And from that work, I developed that skill set. I created frameworks and tools around building stories that hold ideas so that we can tell our corporate presentations or the work that we're doing in the world in a way that holds our ideas so people understand it, so that those presentations feel more like stories and not the boring corporate presentations that many of us have sat through and walked away scratching our heads wondering what we just heard. So that's a little bit of my background and how I got here.
Excellent, Andre. Let me share some of the threads that I'm picking up from there. So, first of all, as a brand strategist, as a organization looking to inspire people around a strategy, and in the world of leadership, which is where we come from in the Leadership Project, it is all about inspiring action, some kind of action, whether it's inspiring action around an idea from a TED talk, inspiring action around motivating buying behavior from the brand strategy point of view, or if we're in the business world, just getting our people from this great idea that the leader has had, the founder of that organization, where they've seen the top of a mountain that they want people to climb. It's about threading that through in a way that's going to make sense to people, capturing people's attention. One of the things that you really hit on there is a couple of times during your discussion was about knowing who you're talking to. So whether you're a brand strategist, knowing who my buyers are and what my buyer behavior might be, or whether I'm a TED talker who knows my audience about, well, what can I do to captivate them with my idea in a way where they walk away remembering what I wanted them to hear. But if I'm not meeting them where they're at, if I don't understand my audience, I'm not going to be able to do that. And the same applies for a leader. So the threads that I'm hearing here, understand your audience, being able to cultivate your idea in a way that's succinct. You're talking about putting a year's work into 6 minutes, getting it to the point where it's succinct and getting to the point where it's memorable. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, absolutely, Mick. That is exactly it. And I think, when I'm listening to you, what I'm hearing, and it's something that we say a lot of, when we talk to leaders, to be a leader, you need to be a professional communicator. That's actually your job. And how do you do that? And I think one of the things that gets lost in leadership training often is that idea that your communications, the way in which you communicate, is going to drive everything you do from that point forward. So when you're inspiring your teams to, as you described it, what is that vision, the top of the mountain? What is it you want people to get to? Well, that's probably one of the hardest things to get alignment on because everybody has a different idea of what that vision actually means. And as a leader, it's your job to actually make sure that everybody doesn't have a different idea, that they have the same idea. And the belief is, well, if I write it in the way that, I want people to deliver it, then they should understand it. But what we know is interpretation and context are the two things that get lost in the building and the creation of these types of very complex and layered statements. And so this is where story comes in. And this is where, as a leader, when you understand how to use story effectively, what you're doing is you're taking these deep and complex and layered statements, these vision statements, these mission statements, or these outcome statements that you want your team to be able to achieve. And by using story, what you're doing is you're adding the context back. You're giving back what you had to take out in order to create something that was succinct. And so story allows you to hold the idea inside an understandable carrier so that people are motivated, inspired, and are aligned on what it is you want to do.
Yeah, really good, Andre. Once again, some things that I'm picking up there is the world is full of situations where two people have had a conversation, they've walked away with a different understanding of what was just said. So it's about using story to bring that narrative back to a point where people are walking away with hopefully a more common understanding of what was trying to be communicated. They might still have their own individual perspective of that story, but we're bringing it back to a more common basis so that people aren't walking away from a conversation with 17 different things that were discussed and one person takes away 2 things, another person takes away a different 3 things, and they think they had a common understanding, only to come back later to find out that it wasn't. A story I sometimes talk about, Andrea, on the show is the Treaty of Waitangi, which was documented in New Zealand between white settlers and the traditional Maori people of New Zealand. And it was signed in, I'm going to say, 1856 or something like this. And you know what? Every year since, people have been arguing about what it meant. So if it had been encapsulated into a storytelling or a more narrative, we would have had a more common thread that people walk away with. How does that connect with you there?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. It is about creating that deep understanding of what it is that you're actually agreeing to. In the example that you just gave, it was, here we have these two very disparate groups of people, each with their own beliefs and understandings, trying to come to a common understanding. Well, they don't have common backgrounds and understandings in order to bridge that. And so what would be needed, I guess, in terms of building that common bridge is a story, a shared story that they could align on and agree that that is exactly what it is we want. The words, what we know, and this is, I think this is one of the things that, as a speaker's coach, as a thought leader coach, I work with words a lot. And what I'm always amazed at is how one word can have so many meanings depending on who you speak with, because we bring our own baggage to the words we use. We think that everybody understands those exact words because they have definitions. We can look them up in the dictionary, but we use them differently. And that's probably what happened in terms of that particular agreement. Here were words. And again, we have two different, very different groups of people with not even a common language in some cases. And so story would have been what would have bridged it probably in those days if they could have agreed upon a story that had meaning for both of them. And so, when we look at that kind of storytelling, we have to make sure that, again, we've got common understanding.
Yeah, good. So a really key message I'm taking away already is about this common ground element, to start with something that we could agree on, like to be able to have a common language or a common agreement of, hey, we all want to achieve this, don't we? And now we've got something that we can start from, and then we can have the conversation. If I go back to some of the things that we said before, if we don't understand our audience, we can't find that common ground. Otherwise, we're just talking at people. We're not talking with people.
Well, and what I would add to that, Mick, is that, even when we think we know our audience, like we work with a lot of scientists and academics and technologists, and, they tend to use jargon. And, often when we're working with a leader within one of those industries or one of those, disciplines, they'll say, oh, my audience knows this. They don't, you know? And the thing is, like, even if they do know it, what you don't know is how they see that thing. So it could be, as an example, the world of acronyms, right? There may be 50 different acronyms within your industry, and people just start throwing them out. And what you're doing is two things when you do that. One is you're assuming that they actually know it, which never assume. But the second thing is, even if they do know it, it takes their mind a second to go, oh, wait a minute, what was that? I got to think about that. As soon as you've done that, they've missed everything else you've just said. And so you assume that they know this. Meanwhile, even if they do, your whole message has now gotten lost in the need for that person to catch up with where you are. And so you create distortion. And so communicating, this is one of the biggest challenges we have as communicators, is eliminating the distortion, creating the alignment so that we can create the action at the end. So what we always have to do is first, and I think this is one of the things that is so underrated in communicating, is what is it you want as an outcome? Why are you communicating today? Why are you giving this talk? Why are you standing in front of this audience? Why are you having this meeting? What is the intended outcome? When we know the outcome, we can then choose the language and the stories that we use to convey that, to get us to that outcome. And we can check in with the audience to go, is this understandable? Because here's where I'm trying to get you, but are you there? And again, from a leadership standpoint, this is so underrated. We think others know. And we think we know our outcomes, but if we don't state them, we don't spend the time on planning it, we end up meandering, and that creates distortion.
Yeah, there's some really powerful takeaways there, Andre, and I'd like to pause for a moment and reflect on some of the things that you just said. Do we want the audience thinking about the thing that we just said, or do we want them listening to what we're saying now? And I've never thought about this from the jargon point of view. I've always thought of it from the power of the pause. And when you look at really effective public speakers, we'll talk about that for a moment, but I think this can apply in your one-on-ones as well. They do put effective pauses in because it allows the person the time to process what was just said before they focus on what you're saying now. And if we're throwing too much technical jargon, the person is still thinking about the thing that you said a minute ago, 2 minutes ago. They're not actually listening to you right now. And then you're going to get frustrated later going, I told you all this. Why are you not picking up all of this? So human beings are terrible multitaskers. Let's give them the time to process. Let's break it down into language that's understandable and give them time to process before we move on to the next point. The other thing that jumped into my mind when you were saying that, Andrea, is also that usually the person that's doing the speaking has been thinking about this idea for 6 months, 6 years, their entire lifetime. The person that you're talking to is hearing it for the first time. So if you don't give them the time to process, you're also going to lose them. So this is a key takeaway for me at the moment. Then when we get back to what you were just saying before, I think there was another very powerful part there. Before we start, what is my purpose of this communication? What am I trying to achieve? What do I want them to do, think, feel differently after this conversation? How am I going to deliver that message with a powerful story? How am I going to check in at the end that it landed and that they are walking away with what I thought I wanted them to walk away with? So this validation check at the end is also something that I think that we miss a lot. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, you've just said so much. I mean, Mick, you clearly are a great public speaker with some of the knowledge you just shared. And because I want to go back to a couple of things. The power of the pause. Whoa. Like that is, we actually call it the speaker's secret weapon, really, right? The pause is that opportunity for us to really bring the audience in a way that the audience is not expecting. Because what the pause does is it immediately forces us to look up and go, well, what happened, or what do I need to pay attention to, or is there something here that I need to really remember? So the pause is so powerful in that regard. And with that, and looking at not just the pause, but our voice, right? And I think our voice is one of those things that we, as especially as leaders, we underestimate. We've got a whole vocal range. Like, if you're a singer, you think about your voice. If you're a leader, you probably don't. It's like, hey, this is my voice. This is all I got, right? Actually, no. I mean, I just put a bunch of inflection in my voice just right there. And why did I do that? I did that so that it allowed me to go into a little bit of a funnier stance. It allowed me to make a point. I slowed down. I sped up. I used techniques all through there. And as leaders, when we are conveying a message, we want to use our voice to give indicators to the audience of what to pay attention to. When I use the term audience, that audience could be an audience of one or an audience of 10,000, because an audience is anyone who's listening to you. And so as a speaker, as a leader, it's my job to use every tool in my toolbox to make sure that those who are listening to me are getting the message. So the next thing you said was talking about that message that maybe I've been thinking about for my entire career, maybe that they don't have access to. They're hearing it for the first time. And here's the thing, having worked with literally thousands of leaders over my career, here, the thing that it never ceases to amaze me is that when I ask the question of what is it you want to convey, the answer, I would say 99.9% of the time, is usually a 15 to 20-minute discussion. And the job of a leader is to have that answer in one sentence. And that's a lot, asking a lot, right? Because you go, well, wait a minute, this is a really complex thing that we're trying to get across. Yes. And you might only have 5 minutes to do it. So if it took 20 minutes for you to explain to me just what you want to say, how are you going to do that to an audience in 5 minutes? We need to be clear and succinct. The word choice needs to be very clear. So the know what you want to say first is really important. And it's understanding your own idea, your own concept. What is it that you're trying to get across? And know it so well that you can do that in one sentence. Now it's a dense and layered sentence. Let's be clear. It will require unpacking. But if you can say it in one sentence where people kind of go, oh, I've never thought of it that way. Tell me more. You've done your job, right? That's the key. So using the tools in our toolbox from the standpoint of our voice, our body language, because that's another thing. We as leaders have an entire physical presence that is important, because how we show up in front of that audience is actually sometimes more important than what we say. Because if we're showing up and not using our physical presence and our voice, our audience starts to lose trust in us. They don't feel physiologically taken care of so that they can help or hear the message that we're putting out there. And then what is that message? And these are sort of the core components of public speaking or of message delivery, but it's what gets ignored because we're so busy moving on to the next, the next, the next.
Three powerful threads that I'm picking up here, Andrea. The first one, I'm going to use the word congruence. The second, less is more. And the third, sparking curiosity. So when I listen to you, let's talk about the congruence for a moment. And I think this is one that we forget a lot. We go into autopilot. We might remember this when we go onto a stage for public speaking, but we forget about it in our daily life, whether it's our one-on-ones with our team members, our team meetings, we forget about this, the inflections of the voice. And I see this a lot, people communicating with an upward inflection at the end of their sentence, which is going to make people question the message, because an upward inflection is usually a question. It's not usually a statement, right? So what am I using the power of my voice to be congruent with the message that I'm trying to get across? My body language. If I'm talking about growth, am I using upward type? Am I standing in a way that looks confident, that has gravitas? So congruence, our body, our hand gestures, our voice, is it congruent with the message that we're trying to get across? Less is more. With all of the stories that we were talking about before, where people walk away with a different understanding of what was just said, the biggest weapon that we've got against that is less is more. To be able to take 16 ideas and bring it down into one rememberable sentence. And I think about a famous quote from Mark Twain that says, I wanted to write you a short letter, but I didn't have time, so here's this long one. It does take time to be able to condense that complex message into one sentence. But if you get it into one sentence, guess what? People don't have to remember anymore. They don't have to remember 16 things. They're going to remember one thing. And now you're on your way towards a conversation where they are walking away with the thing that you wanted them to walk away with. And then the one that really got my interest was spark curiosity. That if you, at the end of that message that you've delivered, if they say to you, tell me more, you've captivated them. So it may not be that they walk away with the final message, but you've given them enough in that message that you've got a conversation going. How does that sit with you?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I mean, so congruence, couldn't agree more. I mean, look, as leaders, it is the thing that I think we forget about the most is we have to be fully congruent. And it's easier than what people make it out to be, because, we can make it really hard and go, well, oh my goodness, I need to know what every body language, gesture means. Sure, I could teach you those things, but really your body already knows. So just trust your body. And same with your voice. Like when we tell stories to kids, we naturally go into storyteller mode, right? And so, suddenly we're acting out all the players and our body is following it. Well, just do that in your day job. Tell stories and allow your voice to create the inflection that's needed. But also, if you've got something that you want people to remember, think about the way in which you are delivering it. Now, I just did that. I just created a pause at the beginning and a pause at the end of that statement. I did that because I wanted that statement to be something that you paid attention to. And that's a great way of doing it, using the power of pause as the way to almost punctuate a statement. So congruence is something that is naturally within us when we allow it to come out. Succinctness is harder. And you're right, it takes time, but you get better at it. And here's the thing, somebody comes to me with 16 ideas and we need to narrow it down to one. And what I do, and what's important for most people to take away, is that you actually don't have 16 ideas. What you have are 16 components of one idea. And so when you let go of the 16 and find the one, the 16 live inside of it. So you don't lose anything. It's that what we've done is we've created the highest order of it. So that is what in your final piece is what sparks the curiosity, because the audience wants to know the 16, but they can't remember the 16. They can only remember the one. So when we deliver the one, it sparks them going, but what about this? And what about that? And now you get to deliver all 16 of those things, but contextualized by the one idea, which is the most important thing. Because when we deliver, when I'm working with anyone on any communication, that's the very first thing that I do is I create what we call a statement of purpose or a core idea. And we're narrowing it all the way down into that. And then once we have that core idea, then what we do is we break it into its component parts and we find the key messages. And then once we've got the key messages, we build story on top of that to hold the core idea that leads to those key messages. And so what that's doing is it's allowing almost a signposting for the audience, right? So when I'm delivering a story, I'm telling you a great story, and at the end of that story or somewhere in a tension point of that story, what I'm doing is I'm transitioning into my core idea. And that core idea is now aligned to that story, often in a way that you weren't expecting. But when you hear it, it suddenly is like, oh, I never thought of it that way. That allows you to almost create a metaphor with the story. And then I take that idea and I break it down into a couple of parts. And I've signposted for you where I'm going now. And now the audience is like, oh, I never really thought of it that way. And now I go into the first piece of it. And now you're hearing how I came to that, or why I know that, or what it is that I believe that helps you to then see it in that new way that I want you to see it. So by doing that work of creating that core idea or that statement of purpose for whatever communication you're doing some heavy lifting, not just for you, but for your audience. And what it does for you as the speaker or the leader is it gives you a language to keep everything within for all your communications. Because what we're really doing is looking at you as a leader and saying, what do you stand for? What is it you want your audience to take away, regardless of who they are or what they're doing? Because you have something that you believe, it's your area of expertise. You've got something about that area of expertise that is unique to you, and you've got a purpose as to why you do it. And those three things together are what create that core idea.
I like this concept that you're using called signposting, Andrea. So one of the things that will happen in the audience, whether it's small audience or big audience, they're going to start with the question, who is this person and why are they here today? And if we don't give them the signposts, they're busy thinking about that, not thinking about our idea. So I really like the signpost. So here's my signposts. Now I've got your attention. Now I'm going to build you to why that signpost is, or what it is that I'm trying to tell you. I really like this as well. All right, Andre, we've got some really interesting takeaways already here. So having a clear purpose about the message that we're trying to deliver, using our techniques, our congruence, using pauses, having the clarity of what it is that we want people to walk away with. At the end, having some kind of validation message or some kind of approach that we're going to check in to make sure that they are walking away with what we want them to walk away with. And in a one-on-one, that might look like, so what if we just agreed to? Or what was your biggest takeaway from today? And that can happen in a small group as well. In a larger setting, it might be a summary, a powerful summary that brings it together. One of the threads that we haven't fully unpacked yet, Andrea, and it can be a challenge for people, is people that think that they aren't storytellers. That, well, how do I even start? I'm not a natural storyteller. That's the story that they tell themselves in their head, by the way. It's a limiting belief, but a lot of people don't believe that they are a storyteller. How does someone start if they don't consider themselves a natural storyteller?
Yeah. And I would say, again, given the people we work with, that's pretty much the come from place for everybody that I work with. Very few people will come in going, I'm a great storyteller. Most of them say, I can't tell a story to save my life. And the thing about story is that you're not born a story. Some people are. Let me sort of reference that. Some people are born storytellers. Like I grew up in a family of storytellers. And so that's just something that's been part of my life. But no one taught me how to be a storyteller. And I think one of the challenges that I found in my own career was that, people can relate to this. Sometimes, imagine that you walk into a cocktail party and there you see somebody who's like telling stories and they got a crowd of people around them and everybody is laughing. And, you walk up and you think, oh, I got a great story. I'm going to join into that conversation. And you tell your story and it kind of falls flat. Wah, wah, like you're like, oh, what happened? Well, the reality is that you missed some of the elements of story. And this is what people are so afraid of, right? Because unless we've been taught how to be a storyteller, we don't actually know what elements are important and what aren't. Now, there are many, many, many different frameworks out there for storytelling. But I find that because we're working in a corporate or a more professional setting, many of them are just too complex. I mean, the hero's journey is fantastic, but it's 16 components to telling a story. None of us are going to remember that. And quite frankly, we don't have the time for it. So what I use, and this is not proprietary to me, although I've made it somewhat proprietary just with the way I apply it, there's a little framework out there called the story spine. It's a really simple way to tell a story. It's 5 steps. And what I love about it is that well, first of all, it's memorable. Like I can do 5 steps. That's pretty easy, right? So the 5 steps are, you start with the environment. Where's the story taking place, right? So, and environments are really important because when we are telling a story, we want to bring the listener in. So we don't want to be outside of that story. We want to be first person, telling that story as if we're there. When we bring the audience into that story, and we describe the environment. So, maybe I'm telling you about, it's a cold and snowy day. I'm in Canada. So right now it's been snowing all day. And, it's a cold and snowy day. And it's one of those days where you walk outside and the hairs inside your nose freeze. And you can smell the snow in the air. Now, if you've ever been to Canada or any place that's cold, you'll know exactly what I mean. And even if you haven't, you can imagine it. You're probably like, oh my God, the hairs in your nose freeze, really? So what I've done is I've brought you into an environment. You're there with me, you're hearing. So we want to use in environment, we want to use language that evokes brain activity. Why? Because our brains love story. And when we've engaged the brain, we've engaged the listener. So using sensory language immediately brings your brain online, right? So sight, smell, touch, taste, sound. What can we give them that brings them into our story? So the environment, that's number 1. Number 2, who's in the story? The characters. Who are they? Characters have names. They have little backstories. Now, we're not going to tell a whole lot. We might be saying, I'm here with my friend Mick. Mick and I have just met, but clearly we are kindred spirits. We both love words and we both love leadership. And we are learning from each other. So now we know a little bit about the 2 characters in this story. Then we go on to what we call the third part, which is the issue, conflict, or opportunity. This is why you're telling the story. And this is, if I go back to that cocktail reception, why most people go wrong, because they miss the first 2 steps and they jump right into the other thing that's happened. The other day, this thing happened to me. Don't do that, right? You've given away the whole story by doing that, right? Build up to it. What's the environment? Who's in the story? Now, give me a little glimpse of it. Don't tell me the whole thing. The other day, Mick and I were discussing the podcast and what we were going to do. And we found that, my technology wasn't working with his technology. Now, that could be, the conflict. And it's enough of a conflict where we go, oh, that's a problem, right? There's a conflict within the story. But here's the key. The fourth point is where you as a storyteller really shine. And that fourth point is what we call the raising of the stakes, or the tension point in the story. And this is what every good storyteller knows how to do. So the other day, this thing might have happened, but then there was an and then moment. What happened that we have to solve? That and then moment is where you get your audience leaning in. So the environment engages the brain. We get them imagining what's going on. The characters help us to relate to who's in that story. The issue, the conflict, or the opportunity gives us a glimpse of what's going on, what's happening. But that and then moment gives us a real tension of, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? When you get the audience to that point, you now have the ability to deliver more than just that tension point. Because what you've done is you've got your audience to an emotional reaction, and that's what you want. And in that emotional reaction, this is the moment where if you are using story as a way to deliver your idea, you deliver your idea right then and there. Because what you've done, as I said, you've got them emotionally connected. They are emotionally engaged. And you now are delivering something that is maybe outside of what that story was about, but related enough where they're like, oh, I see what you just did there. Now, suddenly, it's a metaphor. And if you're using story as a way to, deliver an entire presentation or a communication, pull back on the ending of that story. What you can now do, because now you've given yourself enough sort of material that you can keep that story going, because you could go back to my friend Mick and what do I know about Mick and use some of the idea within that. And I can keep going using my signposting because I've just delivered my idea until I'm ready to close it. Then I go back to that tension point that I left the audience on. So when I'm ready to close the entire talk, then I go back and I go, oh, I forgot to tell you what actually happened. And now I deliver the ending. What's the outcome? That's the fifth point. So we've got the environment, the characters, the issue, conflict, or opportunity, the raising of the stakes, the tension point, and then we go to the conclusion. And so within those 5 pieces, you could tell a story to your kids, you could tell a story at a cocktail party, or you could use a story as the opening of a presentation, hold your idea, build that story through the entire presentation, and close it so that they now understand your thinking, your idea in a way that they couldn't have without that story. And in doing that, of course, you're closing with a call to action. What do you want your audience to think or do differently as a result of what you've just told them?
That was amazing, Andrea. I want to share with you that as I was sitting there listening to you, I was fully immersing myself in what you were saying and being very present. But what I was noticing is my body shift as you were doing the different things. So as you were describing the environment with the freezing cold morning and the nose on your hairs, I physically felt it. Even though we're using words, but I physically felt something. When you spoke about character, I got, yeah, I'm curious. It piqued my curiosity. Oh, well, these characters sound interesting. When you spoke about you were using signposts, but the big one was the anticipation for me. You were leaving little minor cliffhangers along the way going, oh, yeah. And to me, what I was processing is that my mind didn't want to leave an open loop. I wanted to know the conclusion. And if I think about all of my favorite television shows I've ever watched or my favorite movies, television is probably the best one for this one. Every episode finishes with some kind of intriguing moment that gets me to want to watch the next episode. So leaving those little open loops with the signposts, building the story, but you're also building anticipation. And then once I've got that anticipation, I can then deliver. So to break it down, I love the framework. I agree with you on Hero's Journey. It's a bit complex. It works, but it's a bit complex. So describe the environment, describe the characters, describe the issue, the conflict, the tension, the opportunity, then build the tension so that there's an open loop. We're going, oh, I need to know. You can't finish the story now, Andrea. I need to know how it finishes. And in there is our message, and then is our conclusion, our ending. So I think you've given us a wonderful framework there. And I do think, coming back to your story about people at the cocktail party and someone's trying to interject and their story lands flat, I think it's because we miss steps 1, 2, and 3, and we go straight to potentially step 4 or maybe even worse, step 5, and go, why aren't you getting this? But you didn't captivate me along the way. How does that sit with you?
That's exactly it. And Mick, what I'd love, this is a framework we use all the time, and I'd love to offer it to your readers. We have a storytelling toolkit. They can download it. I can, give it to you to put in the show notes, and because it's powerful, and we have the story spine, we have the idea framework, so the way in which to structure an idea, and what we call a talk canvas, which is using the first two, the story spine and the idea framework, and putting it into the context of a presentation. And so using them in the entire thing. So happy to make that available, because I think it's so powerful for people to have access to this, to be able to do that work themselves.
Yeah, really good. I tell you what, I'm also picking, and these tools sound fantastic for exactly the point I'm about to make. Not only the framework that you've just described, environment, character, issue, conflict, opportunity, tension, and then the conclusion, not only is that a powerful way to deliver the message, it's a powerful way to, if you think that you are not a good storyteller, just use this frame. Just go, okay, well, how do I start storytelling? Yeah. I go, well, what was the environment? Oh, I can describe that. Who were the characters? Okay, I can describe that too. What was the issue, conflict, or opportunity? Okay, yeah, I know that. Where's the tension point? Why is this important? And how can I build anticipation? If you use this framework, you can actually turn yourself into a storyteller. It's not just about the delivery, it's about preparing the story itself. How does that sit with you? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. And the other thing that I hear a lot is, well, I don't have any stories. And the reality is our whole life is a story. And when we step outside of ourselves I can't tell a story, because usually the I can't tell a story is what is driving the I don't have any stories, right? When you step away from the fact that actually everybody's a storyteller, you can just learn it. Like you said, use this framework. It's really easy, and go, okay, what did you have for breakfast? Let's tell us the story of your breakfast. That's a story. And really, when we're looking for stories to hold ideas, what we're doing is, because we first identify the idea, you don't go looking for the story before you have the idea. So define your idea first, because that's really important. That's the basis. When you define your idea, ideas hold within them sort of meta concepts. So it might be an idea around transformation, or it might be an idea around alignment, or it might be an idea around, sustainability. So what is it that is the meta piece of that story? Now, when we identify that, and usually that's pretty easy, because once you've defined the idea, you go, oh, well, really what this is saying is this thing. You go, when in my life have I ever been in an experience where that has been true, or where that has been active? And you go, oh, yeah, there was that time when I was in university and I remember, and suddenly a story pops up for you. And it may not even be your story. It might be, oh, I heard this story once, or there's this very famous story of. It doesn't matter where the story comes from. What matters is that in some way you emotionally connect to that story. And your emotional connection to the story, whether it's yours or a famous story or a story that somebody else told you, will be what the audience really leans into.
Yeah, really good. So a couple of things there. Coming back to what we said before, we've got to have a purpose in the first place. What is it that we're trying to achieve? Some people, Andrea, when they hear this, they go, oh, I've been told I need to embrace storytelling in my communication. They will go to something like telling a story about brushing their teeth that's got nothing to do with the message. So start with the message, start with the purpose, start with the idea that you're trying to share, and then you can start building towards a story that will be congruent with the message that you're trying to deliver. It's It's not storytelling for the sake of storytelling or for entertaining people. The story is the medium by which you're going to get a message across. So you can pick the right story. I like what you said about then remember some example in your life as to when that was true, and then you can build the story and you can build the environment, build the characters, build the issue, conflict, or the opportunity, build the tension, build the message and the conclusion. It's really good. I'm going to go out on a limb here. I'm going to share one of my favorite stories with you, and then let's just see how it goes, because I think I've been playing it in my head thinking it follows this. It's relatively short, so let's go. And there's a message to it, of course. So imagine this, Andrea. This elderly couple have been married for more than 30 years. And every morning they like to wake up to the smell of freshly baked bread in their morning. This is something they've done every day for 30 years. Waking up in the morning to the smell of freshly baked bread. Initially they did it in their oven, then later on in their life they bought one of those fancy bread makers. One of their favorite things to do was to wake up with the waft of that smell of bread through the house, and then meet together at the breakfast table. And every morning the husband would get the knob of bread and he'd cut off the end piece of the bread. He'd put it on a plate and give it to his wife with a beaming smile on his face. And every day for 30 years, until one day she just goes, "That's it. I've had enough. Every day you've given me the crusty bit of bread on a plate and put it in front of me. I've had enough. You don't love me. I want a divorce." And the husband turns around to her and says, "But that's the best bit." And then I conclude the story with a discussion about the danger of assumptions and if we don't ask people, etc. It's one of my favorite stories, which is why I wanted.
Yeah, it's a great story. I loved it.
I was just following it with environment, characters, issue, conflict or opportunity, tension, and then the message. So yeah, please.
So I'll tell you this story back. Okay. So the way that I would tell the stories, I would start off with, it's 6 a.m. and I'm sound asleep and I'm woken by the smell of freshly baked bread. I can smell it. At first, it's very subtle, but clearly it gets stronger. And I'm lulled awake by this beautiful smell. Beside me is my husband, who is my husband of 30 years. And I know that we have had this smell every morning. It is what we wake up to. And I love that smell, and I love freshly baked bread. In fact, what I love more than anything is that soft piece in the center. I love it. It's warm and it's soft and it's gentle. And I love it when it's slathered with homemade butter that goes on top of that. Now, my husband and I have been married forever, and we don't have a perfect marriage, but I'd like to think that we're pretty happy. And, if there's one thing that we argue about, it's that sometimes we don't communicate really well. He thinks we do. I think we don't. And hence the argument. But, he's an engineer. And so for him, everything is about process and discipline. And so, I go along with it. Well, on that particular morning, I get up and I didn't sleep very well, quite frankly. I'm a bit cranky and not really wanting to have a conversation. And I sit down at the breakfast table, and my husband has gotten up, as he always does, and with his, process driven approach, has already cut the bread, and he hands me the end slice that is dry and no butter on it. And that's it. I had it. I was like, I want a divorce. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. And my husband looks at me shocked. What are you talking about? And I said, every morning, you hand me this dry slice of bread. I've been smelling this beautiful bread every morning. And all I really want is a beautiful center slice. It's so soft and so gentle. And I want the butter on it. And you keep handing me this dry crust of bread. And he looks at me, he says, but that's the best part. I give it to you because I love you. Hence our communication challenges.
Yeah, really good, Andre. I love the way that you put it into first person, and then the way that you built even more of the environment was threaded through, by the way. It was really good. And you had those different experiences. Yeah, really good.
I wanted to show you the difference because I think it's the challenge for most people of like, well, how do you go into the environment? How do you? And when you put it into the first person, I mean, and obviously this wasn't my story, but in that case, I was just pretending. And we can do that, right? We can put it in the first person by saying, I'm going to tell you an imaginary story like it's my own. We can start there. Or it might actually be a story and we take ourselves right into that, but it helps us, right? So you used imagine, and which is also really powerful. That is a great way because, again, imagine this is you now. And it's even, when we're storytelling, sometimes even doing things like close your eyes and imagine. And so you get the audience into that sort of really beautiful place. So these are really amazing techniques. And so I just wanted to give a different view, though, to show you that you can take a story like that, and you can tell it in so many different ways, and it's all effective.
Yeah. Fantastic, Andre. Look, I want to bring us to a conclusion here. This has been absolutely powerful. The first message I want the audience to take away is storytelling works, right? If you want to deliver a message, if you want to deliver a message that you want people to remember, people remember stories. That becomes the vehicle by which your story gets carried around in their mind for the rest of their life if it's a memorable story. So storytelling works. Before we even start, though, we need to have a purpose. What is the purpose of the communication that I'm trying to deliver? Then how am I going to deliver the story? And we spoke about some of the techniques that you can use along the way. The power of the pause. People are terrible multitaskers. Don't ask their brain to multitask. Use pauses, allow them to reflect on what you're saying. Use a less is more approach. Try and condense your 16-point story into a one sentence narrative. How can I use less is more to really bring it down? Congruence. Make it come natural. I really like your message here, Andrea, around natural congruence of your body language, of your voice, etc., etc. Don't overthink it, but be aware of it without being conscious or self-conscious about it. That's going to be the key here. Check in at the end to make sure that the message that you wanted to get across was the message that landed for them. And it could be that it's just to spark curiosity so that there's more conversations that come from the end of it. To embrace storytelling, use Andrea's 5-point framework. It's really powerful. Describe the environment, describe the characters, describe the issue, the conflict, or the opportunity. Build tension and anticipation because human brains don't like the open loop. They'll want you to conclude the story if you leave an open loop. And then you can deliver your message and check in whether it landed well. Andrea, and anyone can do it. So as long as you've got a purpose for your message, then think about a story that's happened in your life or a story that you've observed elsewhere that will be congruent with the message that you're trying to get across. And then use this framework and you can do it. If you think you can't do it, trust me, you can do it. And the best thing you can do is start. So you might want to get this framework that Andrea is talking about and start scribbling and go, okay, well, what was the environment? What were the characters? Get into the practice of doing it and you'll find that it's like a muscle. You can build it and it can become a natural part of your communication. Andrea, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a wonderful conversation. What I'd like to do now is go to our rapid round. These are the same 4 questions that we ask all of our guests. So first of all, Andrea Sampson, what is the one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
You don't have to be the expert. You just have to be yourself.
Nice. Yeah. I think we all need to remember that sometimes. Yeah, really good. Okay, what is your favorite book?
I'm a reader, so I read all the time. But when I think about what's my favorite book, the book that I go back to, and it's an old one, is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. It is something that has really governed my life. I go back to it all the time. Those teachings, as old as they are, they're still relevant today.
I read it again over the Christmas break. It's one of the ones that it's not one that you read once. You go back to it. Go back to it. Really good. What's your favorite quote?
I hate to say it's a quote that I have, which is stories are carriers for ideas. And I often say, stories are a Trojan horse for an idea. So when you put your idea inside of a story, it gets, your idea gets taken along for the ride and it gets shared. So stories are carriers for ideas.
That sums up our whole conversation well in one sentence. You just practice what you preach. Very good. And finally, Andrea, if people want to know more, if they really want to get into this and go, yeah, I'd love to be a thought leader, or someone that uses storytelling in my daily life to be a better communicator, how do people find you?
Yeah, follow me on. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I have a YouTube channel under Talk Boutique, which is my company, that I post on every week. I have videos that give a lot of the same information, so you can access it and go a bit deeper there. And follow us on, join our mailing list on talkboutique.com. We send out a weekly newsletter with lots of tips and tricks. So, any one of those places you can find me.
Oh, thank you so much, Andrea. Thank you so much for sharing your gift with us today. It is a gift, this gift that you have, your gift of your time, the gift of your wisdom, and most importantly, the gift of this framework, which I think all of us can use. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Mick, for giving me this opportunity. That is a gift in and of itself. So thank you. And thank you to the listeners who have made it this far. And I look forward to hopefully meeting them and speaking with you again at some point in the future.
Wow. What an insightful conversation with Andrea Sampson. We've unpacked the key elements of storytelling, why it's a critical leadership skills, and how you can craft compelling narratives that inspire action. Remember, stories aren't just for entertainment. They shape how people perceive you, your message, and your leadership. So as you step away from today's episode, I challenge you. How can you integrate storytelling into your leadership? Whether it's in your presentations, one-on-one conversations, or inspiring your team, your words have the power to move people. In the next episode, I'll be sharing my own reflections from Andrea and sharing with you how I'm already using her framework to improve the way that I use storytelling in everyday life. Thank you for listening to The Leadership Project at mickspears.com. A huge call out to Faris Sadek for his video editing of all of our video content, and to all of the team at TLP. Joanne Goes On, Gerald Calabo, and my amazing wife, Say Spears. I could not do this show without you. Don't forget to subscribe to the Leadership Project YouTube channel, where we bring you interesting videos each and every week. And you can follow us on social, particularly on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Now, in the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and join us on this journey as we learn together and lead together.